Expect me to do everything. All right. So we'll call this meeting to order again. And I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Unalakleet and Syilx peoples. And are there any late items? No late items? Public input.
No distinction to the city hall, your worship, and the entrance in the public gallery is for later on the agenda. So unless someone has input on other items, yeah.
No?
I didn't actually ask him that beforehand.
Well then, we'll go on to the adoption of the minutes. So the regular council meeting minutes on the 10th of May 2022, the recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on May 10th, 2022 be adopted.
So moved.
Any discussion? Any errors? Omissions? All in favor? And moving right on item 4.2, special council meeting minutes, May the 11th, 2022. Recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting held on May 11th, 2022 at 6 p.m. be adopted. Etchert and Luck. Any errors, omissions, discussion? No? All in favor? Carried. And recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting held on May 11th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. be adopted. Luck and White. Any errors, omissions, discussions? No. All in favor? Carried. Item 5.1, public hearing. Moving right along. Item 6, general matters, delegations and recognitions. Unfinished business? No. Number 8, 8.1, Parks Regulations Amending Bylaw. Parks Regulations Amending Bylaw number 2334, 2022 was given 3 readings as of May the 10th, 2022, and is presented now for adoption. The recommendation is that Parks Regulations Amendment Bylaw number 2334, 2022 be adopted. Luck and Etchert. Question?
Just one comment that will, one update from the last time we talked about this. Thank you, Your Worship. So we had another meeting with the same group of service providers to discuss this through and talk through a little bit more details as to what implementation would look like. I think that even regardless of what happens tonight, but if council does adopt this bylaw, we would likely begin to have conversations with those individuals in the park and would likely start enforcing, like actually requiring this on Monday of next week. If it were to go ahead, this isn't something where we're just gonna jump in with RCMP and bylaw tomorrow morning without a little bit more conversation about it. And so just wanted to give council a heads up that should you so choose, it would likely be enforcement starting next week.
Is there any discussion?
And even when I say enforcement, it's going to be support, encouragement, and try to have the softest possible touch with it, but for lack of a better word.
Good, thank you. That's good to know. Are there any questions or discussion on this item? Councillor White?
Are the, is all the sanitary things put in place? Washrooms, shower options?
The answer is is yes and no. So the bathroom is open from dusk till dawn in the park as it stands right now. And again, we are going to evaluate kind of the prudence on that. Council may remember that there was some vandalism and other unfortunate incidents when it was open 24 hours last year. And so there is a desire to see whether that may improve when this is only open until 9 o'clock at night. But if there's a need for that and folks are choosing to use other locations outside of the bathroom because of the hours that it's open, we will look at opening it for longer hours, but we just have to acknowledge that comes with cleanup and additional costs and maintenance. As far as the showers, they're generally available through the Endeavor to Be Better program, where many of those individuals are going for breakfast during the day anyways, and so there is shower availability.
Okay, so the washrooms are in another park from where they're going to be camping.
Yeah, it's a close proximity walk, but yeah, they're across a pedestrian bridge. Agreed.
So they have to go to the washroom at 2 in the morning and go over to Rotary Park, is that it?
To Lions.
Well, across the road.
No, across the pedestrian bridge. So if they're in Naquala here, they go across the pedestrian bridge and the bathrooms are in Lions.
Oh, okay,
At Lions.
okay.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yep, thanks.
Councilor Fair?
Thank you. Wondering if was there any discussion with the service providers about providing some sort of facility to store things?
Yeah, I think that we're going to end up covering the whole gamut of the conversation. Yes, that was another item that's talked about. We did have some conversations with other municipalities as well, who have provided storage. Generally speaking, where storage is provided, it's a staffed facility because people need to watch over that. So we're not in a position right now to be able to provide kind of a staff day storage. That being said, if there were a grant opportunity through some of these other fundings available to look at that, it would make life easier for these residents. But I don't think, certainly on the staff side as well as on the Ask Wellness and the shelter side, there isn't an ability to do that. Marlene is having a follow-up conversation with the Endeavor to Be Better program if people were to bring some goods over there that are needed, whether they would be able to be stored there. So I don't have a firm answer on that one yet, but storage is, like, where does the stuff go ends up being an important question, both for the individuals and I think the residents as a whole. In order for this to be successful, we are going to need to come up with an answer for that. And as much as it sounds like a cop-out, I think that answer is probably going to grow organically as opposed to having all of the solutions at the outset. Here, we need to figure out how much stuff needs to be transported each day, how much of this maybe doesn't need to be there. So in short, there is not a great storage solution at this point, but we are discussing options.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that the discussion is ongoing, because I agree to an extent that, yeah, there's no silver bullet there. It'll need to, as you say, be figured out organically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In the meantime, I should add, what's likely to happen is, even if there are goods, if they're kind of neatly stored and stacked in one side and not kind of inside the tents or what, that would be acceptable for the near term until we can figure out some other solutions. So we're not trying to be punitive with this. We recognize that for these people, some people have a lot of stuff and very limited capacity to move it, and it's not to them junk, something that they're willing to just throw away. So we'll work through that as we go here.
Good, thank you. It sounds like we've got a plan, and we're but it's developing and we're working for it and humanitarianly wise. So thank you. Any other points? Are we ready for the question? Recommendation that Parks Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 2334, 2022 be adopted. We've moved and seconded. Oh, all right.
Jefferson. How are we going to manage the success of this program? That's one of my concerns in there. Because if nothing happens, we don't have people that are able to make sure they're cleaning up at 8 in the morning and not setting up till 7. How are we going to measure that success? I guess one way is the community's going to let us know pretty quick, but how are we going to measure success there? Because I think that's what we want to do here, see some success with some of this in the community, I'm guessing, or are we just paying lip service, or what's this looking like, Mr. Smith? Just, yeah.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I think it's related to some of the questions that were asked the first time around,
Yeah.
and I would say it's going to completely depend on how you measure success.
Yeah.
I think this is guaranteed to be an unsuccessful initiative by many standards and metrics. If the measure is the number of tents that are there during the day, you can hold us accountable to that metric and hopefully slowing the rate of growth. That is the only measure in which I would feel in any way comfortable talking about success here.
Okay.
I think that if we're talking about we're going to be looking at storage challenges. We're going to be looking at really pushing people to other areas of our community where there are going to be challenges that arise from that. I think Councillor White raised an issue. It's not like everything is solved with the permanent, sanitation and health facilities that are needed. So I wouldn't want to be measured on the success of this. We wholly acknowledge that I think this is going to be a very, very partial addressing of a much larger problem. So with that, we will work with RCMP and Bylaw to, at the very least, as this is starting out, there's going to need to be more time there, encouraging people to move out and get ready. Hearing from other communities, that need is much lesser as time goes on. But yeah, I know that that's not a very satisfying answer for council sometimes, but it's the truthful one.
No, and I appreciate that. The truthfulness is what works best in this situation for sure. We just gonna, we're not gonna see an overnight success in a week. That's not gonna happen, and this is gonna be an ongoing challenge for some time. But that's just the way it is in our community and other communities. So this isn't, I think Councillor Fair said, there's no silver bullet here, and I think we're doing the best and trying the best we can. So I appreciate the honesty. Thank you.
Councillor White.
One of my main concerns is the residential area surrounding that park. And I mean, just last year we had major issues, upset people, all kinds of things going on in the park. And I just really have a problem. I just think there has to be another solution of some sort, rather than, I mean, we're talking about a limited amount of people opposed to, I don't know, a couple hundred people in that vicinity. And I'm just really not comfortable with it. Although I know something has to happen, and I know they have to have somewhere to go, but I just don't think the park is the answer, especially in the location it is with all the surrounding residents around that park. Thanks.
Councillor Etchert.
I think everybody else kind of feels the same, that maybe this isn't a great solution, but if we don't do something, nothing's going to change, and the problem's been getting worse over time. At least if we can try and have some regulations here and have some kind of level of compliance, it's a step of trying to change something. it was never suggested that people come here, but here they are in the park. There is a washroom nearby. It's not that it's a great situation, and we want to help people as much as possible, but at least the shelter is there, and there's a washroom over the bridge, and hopefully it will reduce the number of tents, and hopefully people will find this inconvenient and want to seek mental health and seek supports maybe in a bigger center, but anyway.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think we're doing our best to make it not a permanent dwelling place. So call the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to advise, there have been a number of comments which seem to be veering away from staff questions, but the motion has actually yet to be moved and seconded, so if you wanted to, I wasn't sure if you were still...
I thought we did. I thought it was...
Yeah, it wasn't clear you'd moved on from questions into a debate phase, or if you'd moved back, or... Anywho.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought we had done the So, could I have a mover and a seconder again? Luck and Etchert. Okay, now do we have questions or comments? Has it all been said? Okay. Oh, no, you've had your limit.
Just a quick one. Is there any way of putting some kind of like if they don't behave, they can't stay, sort of thing?
Good develop.
Maybe not behave isn't the right answer or question, but
Not really. The answer is largely no. This is probably, people staying in parks is a really, really bad outcome and scenario in our community. We all recognize it. I think that's why we're agonizing over it, and everybody has a different lens, but it's a not a great spot for anybody to be, and knowing that that's happening is indicative of there being, you know, larger problems, and either in the lives of the individual or societally, and these are things that we're going to have to work to address. But for these individuals, setting up a tent is kind of the closest thing to a constitutional right that the courts have found for housing, and so there really isn't another mechanism to say, hey, you're not allowed to camp in this park because we've told you that that's the only park that anybody's allowed to camp in. So we don't have a whole lot that we can do other than require people to comply with the packing up each day.
Good.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lois?
You know, I think Mr. Smith pretty much said it all. But yeah, essentially the issue is that the courts have found that being homeless is not in itself an offence. They are allowed to sleep somewhere. So this is an attempt to essentially control where that sleeping happens. And if we don't have this, then the sleeping can take place anywhere. And if people say don't behave in that area, there's nothing we can do to really move them on besides constructing zero barrier housing. And we don't have the money for that. BC Housing needs to do it.
Okay. So, are we done? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. All right. And moving on to 8.2. The official community plan amendment, bylaw number 2327, and zoning amendment, bylaw number 2328, Gateway 286, final adoption. And Mr. MacArthur, are you doing this one? Alrighty.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Ms. Bradshaw is away today, so I'll take this report. In this report, as you mentioned, is regarding the Gateway 286 amending bylaws. First and second readings of the amending bylaws were given on November 9th of last year. We held a public hearing on January 25th, as well as gave third reading on the same evening. Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure signed off on the bylaws earlier this month on May 9th. Staff are recommending adoption of the amending bylaws, and I'll keep this one short and turn it back over to you. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Now, do we need a mover and a seconder before we start any, or this is staff questions? Okay, questions for staff, anybody? Answers for staff? All right. Okay, it looks like we're ready to, are you moving?
No, I was thinking.
Oh, no. Is this a question for staff?
Just a quick question.
Okay.
I'll comment to staff, yeah. No, just a quick comment on the whole OCP amendments and the things we've been doing over the last while. Don, Mr. MacArthur, the work you've done and everything here, this has been amazing. This is going to move our Merritt into to the next plateau with approving this OCP plan. And so very thankful for all the work you've done. I don't have any specific answers or questions. We've done some pretty thorough chatting about this, and so we had a lot of plenary sessions and open houses and all those kind of things on it. So, but want to thank you for all the work. I know you spent many hours pulling this together, so I really want to appreciate you for that. So I really don't have any questions at this time for you, but just want to say how glad we have this moving forward. Absolutely.
And well, staff appreciate those comments, Councillor Luck. That's the next report on the agenda.
Oh.
This one is for Gateway to D6 only. So
Oh.
the amending bylaws for
That's
that.
the one I was. Sorry. I'm embarrassed.
That's
No,
that's
we'll
quite all
we'll
right.
just
I'll-
hold them for the next one.
It's okay. We'll take the praise any day. So feel
No,
free.
He just took them back. Sorry. All right, then, do we have a mover and a seconder? Recommendation that council adopt official community plan amendment bylaw number 2327, 2021. Etchert and Fair. Any questions? Any comments? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. Thank you. And the second recommendation, that council adopt zoning amendment bylaw number 2328, 2021. Etchert and Luck. Any comments, questions? No? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Moving on to 8.3. And here's the one you want. Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2336, 2022. And Mr. MacArthur, will you introduce it?
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, tonight we do unveil the official community plan, or the proposed official community plan. City staff, in collaboration with the consultant WSP, embarked upon the OCP update project 2 years ago now, in the spring of 2020. And following 4 rounds of public engagement, as well as COVID, wildfire alert, and flood evacuation, we're finally ready to have council consider the proposed bylaw. And of course, the proposed OCP is attached to this report. There's quite a few documents there that are quite lengthy, and I'll get to why those are required in a second here. The Local Government Act outlines procedures for adopting an official community plan. As per Section 477 of the LGA, following first reading of the proposed bylaw, the city must consider the proposed OCP in conjunction with its financial plan, as well as any waste management plan, and then refer the document to the Agricultural Land Commission for comment, and then hold a public hearing. In addition to those steps, the TNRD Board of Directors must accept the regional context statement that's in the OCP, and that statement responds to the regional growth strategy that we have for our region. And that's prior to the adoption of the bylaw as well. So we've included the financial plan, our waste management plan as attachments, as well as our sanitary sewer utility master plan, because the liquid waste management plan and the sanitary sewer utility master plan kind of go hand in hand. So first, to speak to the financial plan, and we do have, of course, our finance director here, so if he wants to add anything at any point, please feel free. The city's financial plan outlines the path to ensure the needed infrastructure and services are provided for the city's growing population as envisioned by this proposed OCP. This includes funding for things like active transportation so that residents can move around the community, the use of DCCs to fund infrastructure projects, as well as property tax and grant funding allocated to capital projects, and the funding of other items such as municipal facilities, the Nicola Valley Aquatic Center, Memorial Arena, Civic Center, etc., for the enjoyment of residents and visitors. Given that the financial plan addresses all of these items, including land use, parks and recreation, infrastructure, transportation, emergency services, as well as climate action, staff believe that the financial plan is indeed well aligned with the proposed OCP. And I believe Mr. Lois has additional comment to that before we move on to the waste management plan.
Mr. Lois.
I do. Your Worship and Mr. MacArthur, I'm just thinking about a very strict reading of the Local Government Act at this point, and with the Section 477 requirement, as Mr. MacArthur has said, it's after first reading of a bylaw, the local government must do the following in the indicated order. I know a normal thing in Merritt, and the way Mr. MacArthur is of course doing this, is to give the full staff report in one go, but it might be advantageous if you do a rather curtailed introduction at this point, followed by first reading, and then the detailed introduction at second reading, just in order to make sure that nobody can say there was any impropriety in the Local Government Act's formulation.
Yes, and I'm certainly fine to do that. There are other points, of course, to cover, so I'll have to make sure to come back to those. But if council would like to ask staff questions with regard to the financial plan alignment with the OCP first, that would be fine. But then we do need to also talk about the waste management plan.
So if we're going to do that, do we need to have a motion first? Or is this still just to staff? Mr. Lois.
Sorry, this is, and I'm probably being unnecessarily pernickety on this one, but yeah, with the 477 sub 3 thing, it's the consideration of the financial plan and waste management plan sections come after first reading. So essentially, for any given bylaw, you have 4 votes. Those are 3 readings and then adoption. So that would imply that you should move second and vote on just that it's a thing, essentially, which is first reading. It's the most casual possible, bringing it into the council chamber for discussion, and then perhaps Don could give the extremely lengthy detail with on the OCP and all its sections in alignment with the appropriate plans.
So I'll ask then for
Mover
in a second. Okay.
For first reading only.
So recommendation that council give first reading to official community plan bylaw number 2336 2022. Mover and a seconder. Fair and White. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. And now we go on to the second, and we don't do a...
No, now Mr.
Now
MacArthur
you
gives
can
his
do your
full detailed
explanation.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the financial plan will need to be considered. So if council would like to ask staff questions about that, you can also have debate around that. And there's also the waste management plan. So I'll speak a little bit to the waste management plan as well, and then we'll continue from there. The city adopted the liquid waste management plan in 2005, which was also approved by the province. And there are several ways in which that plan is aligned with the proposed OCP. Specifically, items such as the wastewater treatment plant, the rapid infiltration basins, and the biosolids disposal sites are all detailed in that plan. And the OCP, of course, refers to those and speaks to the locations of those items. In addition to the liquid waste management plan, as I mentioned earlier, the city adopted the sanitary sewer utility master plan as well, and that was later on in 2012. While the liquid waste management plan focuses on the processing of liquid waste, the sanitary sewer utility master plan analyzes the entire sewer system and proposes potential improvements based on several growth scenarios. So there are a number of sewer pipe sections that have been outlined as very important or vital to our community in that plan. And in your council report, you'll see a table that's been created by staff that shows how the OCP is proposing to address each of those sections. Additionally, the OCP in Section 11 recommends that both the liquid waste management plan and the sanitary sewer utility master plan be updated in the coming years. Staff also recommend that there might be a synergy in combining the two plans into one rather than having two separate plans. But that will be, of course, up to council in future. So those are the two areas that need to be looked at first by council. So if council has any questions around the alignment between the financial plan and the OCP and the waste management plan and the OCP, we would be happy to take those questions.
Either you've done such a fantastic job that there's absolutely no questions, or we're stunned. Are there any questions at all for Mr. MacArthur at this time? No? Carry on.
Okay, and in addition to those steps, the next step is to refer the document to the ALC. So staff have already touched base with the ALC a number of months ago in preparation of this, and then more recently, the ALC staff have indicated that they're hoping to have comments back on the OCP to us in mid to late June. And staff would then present those comments hopefully at the public hearing that we would schedule if the proposed bylaw receives second reading tonight. Staff have also provided the OCP, including the regional context statement, to the TNRD for review. And TNRD staff have indicated that they plan to present the regional context statement to their board as soon as possible, fingers crossed for their next meeting on June 16th. Referrals have also been made on the document to other organizations. So we provided it to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for comments. That's not required, but as a courtesy. MOTI staff told us last week that they're working on getting those comments back to us, and we should have those in the near future. So again, we'll be able to provide any comments that MOTI has to council at the public hearing. BC Transit already provided their comments, and those were accommodated in this final proposed bylaw. So those changes that were requested have already been made. And local First Nations were also provided the OCP bylaw at draft stage, and any comments we received back were incorporated as well. So staff are recommending that council give, first reading has already been given, also second reading this evening, and also to direct staff to schedule a public hearing. So if there's any other questions, please feel free to ask. And with that, Your Worship, I'll turn it back to you.
No questions for staff?
Further praise would also be welcome. Thanks, sir.
Let it be recorded that there was applause from the audience. Okay. So We'll move on then to the recommendation that council give second reading to official community plan bylaw number 2336, 2022. White and Fair. Are there any comments? Nope. All right. I'll ask the question. All in favor? Unanimous? Carried? And recommendation that council direct staff to schedule a public meeting. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Luck and White. Any comments, questions? No? All in favor? Carried? So moved. Thank you, Mr. MacArthur. And did you already tell us when that public hearing will be? Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to section 9, new business. 9.1, appeal, decision to accept or reject revitalization tax exemption application by Olympic Villas Limited for 4010 Walter Street. And who's speaking to this? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that there's some items here that, of course, we would they're going to be a little bit uncomfortable to probably talk through, but the commitment from staff and as well, I've talked with Irfan about this beforehand, is we will be respectful, stick very much to the facts of things. We want you as council to understand and be comfortable with your role as kind of the independent arbiter of this. That means that if you have to say, hey, staff, we think you goofed up in rejecting this application, that's okay. We're not going to be upset about that. And that's completely your prerogative as council. We want you to recognize that this particular process is what's called a quasi-judicial hearing technically. And so what that means is you're not obliged in the same way you normally am to consider us as your experts to do whatever we ask. Don't think that in the slightest. This is not something where you're taking a recommendation from us. You are an independent party at this point, evaluating the actions that we're taken and coming to your own independent conclusions based on the evidence and facts before you. So we'll take this at your discretion, Councillor Christofferson, but how this would ordinarily proceed is we would lay out the case, the information. Mr. Sonawala would have an opportunity to speak to his belief as to what has happened in this. You would then have an opportunity to ask questions of either party for as long as you deem necessary to answer any questions that you have prior to coming to a vote and a conclusion. The one thing that I will add on this as well is that we do feel it's important that at this point Council remembers that this is really just about whether or not the application for the tax revitalization application should be received, not whether that application should be granted. And so this is just the process as to the reception of the application itself is what's at appeal here. So with that, if it's the pleasure of council, I'll continue. Otherwise, we'll ask questions on any procedure.
Okay, just to clarify in my own mind and for council, we are not discussing the merits of whether to grant the application or reject it. We are simply discussing whether or not to allow the applicant to submit a completed application on a pre-existing bylaw. Is this correct?
Yeah. I think that's a great summary.
Okay, so it's. Does everybody understand that then? All right. So. Carry on.
So really, the issue itself isn't all that complicated. background and the law behind it is more complicated than the issue. But the short of it is that in June of 2021, staff became aware through some phone calls and some emails that Mr. Sanawala was under the impression that he had received a tax revitalization exemption for his property, and wasn't sure as to why that hadn't been credited or applied at this point. We have the emails that are attached to this report. If council would like to read those in greater detail in appendices A, B, and C. So to go back to this initial moment when he was inquiring, at this point, staff went through our records and said, wait a second, we don't have an application. We don't have any record of an application anywhere on this. And the applicant alleges that the application was hand-delivered to Mr. Broderick at an open house on June 6th on 2019. And the short of it is that we just don't have any record of that application. We went through the notes to file that Mr. Broderick had for the Olympic Villas development, and there were 2 references to tax revitalization exemption, namely the letter that is attached as Appendix B, showing that we were having discussions. In fact, staff was supportive of an application for that project. Just that we didn't have any follow-up with that. So what we will note for council is that while we don't have any record, it's not beyond the realm of impossibility that this application was provided. That's totally something that could have happened, and we don't refute that. We just have no record of it, and the challenge for us is there wasn't any follow-up conversation, and also that even if there was a record of that, that didn't meet the requirements for submitting an application of this type. In particular, those requirements are set out in the City of Merritt Revitalization Tax Exemption Bylaw, that is Appendix D in the report. And those requirements were also listed in the initial letter to Mr. Sanawala on June 5th, or that we had sent out in November of 2018, and was referenced in the application back to the city on June 5th, 2019. And so with this and considering all of the circumstances, staff exercised our discretion under Section 12 of the bylaw to reject an application in circumstances where work that's already been performed or for which a building permit application was submitted to the city prior to the application for an agreement. That's the set of circumstances that we can reject an application under. And in the opinion of staff, where we just didn't really know this was even something that was requested until 2021, well after the process had commenced, we exercised our discretion to reject that application. Now, to dive into some of the nitty-gritty details, because when you're looking at how to properly read whether an application was in time or not, the details of the bylaw matter. And so we acknowledge that when the applicant first proposed the 94-unit mixed affordable housing project in 2018, that we did have discussions about a revitalization tax exemption that were supportive of the application, and that is well evidenced by Mr. Broderick's letter on November 5th, 2018. And in that letter, we do acknowledge that we listed the requirements set out in Schedule D for what needs to be submitted as part of the application. And Mark said, please submit the enclosed Schedule D and the following. And the following was a certificate that all taxes assessed, rates, charges, fees imposed on the parcel have been paid. A copy of the current property assessment notice for the parcel is issued by BC Assessment. A description of the eligible project, including details regarding the extent and value of the project, which will be confirmed by the building permit process, and a proposed agreement in executable form. Now, the first two, I would say, are much more minor. The third one is important because in order for you as council, when we bring this application to you, to have any idea as to the size and scope of the revitalization exemption that you're making, you need to know the approximate value of those works. And so that's pretty critical information that needs to be submitted with the application, as well as that proposed agreement in executable form, which is one of those things where there has to be work beforehand where we have an agreement that we can bring to council and say, yes, we're giving you authority to sign off on this agreement. And so none of that work was done in this particular case. And for staff, we have to have that. We have to have conversations about that in order to bring something to you. And so where none of those conversations took place, we think that that's important in recognizing that, yes, we acknowledge that it is possible, even though we have no record of it, that a piece of paper may have been submitted at an open house, but it doesn't meet, from staff's perspective, the definition of what the requirements are in the bylaw for submission of an application. And so with what we have, we just didn't see how we had any choice but to reject that application so late after the fact. We do acknowledge that had we had those conversations earlier, we could have gone through that process. It's just so hard to do after the building is substantially started. With that as well, we do want to acknowledge that in section 11 there that I just referenced, that the bylaw requires that the owner of the parcel, and the quote is, must submit the documents listed in section 11 with the application. So it's not a permissive thing, it's a must. You'll also note that in the application form itself, there is a notice at the bottom that says that the applicant has read and understands the requirements of the bylaw as part of that Schedule D application. And so that is something that we put on people. They need to know the requirements, and we'll work with you. We'll go back and forth and have discussions, but the onus is on the owner to make sure that those elements are fulfilled. We also recognize in Mr. Broderick's letter that he acknowledged to the applicants that ultimately it is a council decision to approve a tax exemption, and a staff report would need to be presented to council after receipt of the application. And so we recognize that for us, it's really difficult to get to the spot where there can be a belief that this has been given, let alone an application made and acted on, when we have gone a period of 2 years without bringing anything forward to council. And so the short of it is on that component that we don't feel that the applicant, as the Schedule D that was submitted, meets the requirements for an application under the bylaw. We also note that all of the discussions that staff had around the revitalization tax exemption were in relation to the project when it was still a 94-unit building that was proposed that had an affordable housing component to the project. We note that a 75-unit building could still qualify under this, but staff's support for that may or may not have been the exact same if there wasn't an affordable housing component. And the only reason that we raise this as to why we feel it's relevant is it was staff's perception, and recognizing that this is only speaking to perception, and you'll need to speak to Mr. Sonawala on this afterwards, that the revitalization tax exemption had intentionally been dropped from the discussion when the project had morphed to the 75-unit model. And we particularly believe that because of the comments that were in the applicant's report, that report that was made to council following the open house that they had done. And very grateful they did the open house, but that report acknowledged that, I quote, "Olympic Villas Inc. considers the affordable housing should have no extra impact on taxpayers. This means affordable housing rent should not be brought down with grants other than seed funding. Rather, it should be achieved by raising the income and reducing the expenses for families." Now, admittedly, staff didn't inquire further into that comment, but it led and supported to our thought that, okay, with acknowledging that this is no longer a formally affordable housing project, it's just going to be a project that out of the goodness of the developer's heart, he wants to be affordable, that it wasn't intended to have an impact on taxpayers, of which naturally a tax revitalization exemption is. And so, in conclusion, the city has no records indicating that the Schedule D application was ever received prior to the commencement of construction, and that even if it were, the application didn't contain the necessary supporting documents and is thus an incomplete application. It's never considered by council, and the application wasn't followed up on by the applicant in any way for 2 full years between June of 2019 and June of 2021, despite regular interactions and communication. Staff communicated the decision to reject the applicant's application under the Section 12 of the bylaw on May 4th, 2022. And with that, that's staff submission, and so we're happy to take questions prior to your speaking with Mr. Sonawala.
Okay. Before we do that, I'd just like to remind everybody that we are not discussing the merits of whether to grant an application or reject it. So if we start heading down that road, I'll cut you off. We're not discussing the merits of it. We are only discussing whether or not to allow the applicant to submit a completed application. And Mr. Smith has done a fine job of outlining the difficulties with that, but we also want to try to be fair. So we're only discussing whether or not to allow the applicant to submit a completed application form, not the project itself. And so with that,
And I would suggest that at this point, questions from council exclusively, then it would go to Mr. Sonawala, questions for Mr. Sonawala, and then you would deliberate and any debate that you have amongst yourselves.
so questions now are to staff.
Correct.
Okay.
Questions are to staff?
To staff.
If you have questions, if you don't, that's fine too.
Okay. So do you fit the bill, Mr. Etchart?
Exemption, because the exemption says 100% the first year, 75, 50, and then 25. If they make an exemption for tax revitalization, is it 100% of the municipal tax? Or because
in general, that is how the agreement would be structured, but it is the agreement itself, which again is one of those items that would need to come forward and wasn't kind of discussed as part of this, that would discuss that. It is, in general, where your bylaw sets out that scheme, and that was the scheme that set out, that would be the kind of the default mechanism.
Because I know that we had discussed wanting to change the bylaw for future.
Yep, we're working on that one for you.
So if we accept this, it would be based on those terms.
It is, no, we would work on an agreement and bring that forward, but it would be based under the old bylaw, which has now been repealed. Because if the application stands, it is on the route of it being submitted in 2019, at which point that application was still in force.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Councillor White?
Okay, so there was government funding for this project, correct?
I would defer that question to Mr. Sonawala, and so hold that one until he has it, but that's not for staff.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions for staff? Doesn't look like it. Do we move on to Mr. Sonawala's presentation? Is there a question?
I might get some clarity.
Just on the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Might be some clarity from Mr. Sonwala's presentation. Would we be able to come back and ask staff some questions after, a little bit of back and forth? Okay, thank you. I want to hear both sides first. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Good. Thank you.
Hello.
Now, is
Can
Mr.
you-
Sonawala's mic on?
Uh,
The microphone is on
okay. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the time. Before I do say anything, I just want to make sure that any of the things that I mentioned is not reflects back upon the staff. Mr. Smith, Mr. MacArthur, Mr. Lewis, they have been working very hard. Anytime when you mention, they come to me, they talk and everything. It does not reflect anything upon their work. Just
Can I interrupt for a second? Can everyone hear him all right? Is he on mic?
I'm not sure. Is it, I have to turn something on here?
So, Your Worship, this is the issue that we first ran into a few weeks ago. That microphone is hooked up to the broadcast system, so everyone watching on a computer can hear Mr. Sonawala, but it doesn't appear to be hooked well into the speakers of this room, which makes it a little difficult. It might actually be easier if you're having any difficulty if Mr. Thompson or Mr. MacArthur donate their microphone, if that can be easily done.
I can speak louder if that is okay.
I was mainly concerned about the audience.
That's okay. Yeah, I'll just speak a little louder.
Yeah.
So can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
So I will just rephrase. I just want to make sure that any of the things that I'm going to mention does not reflect bad on the staff. All the staff, they work very hard. They are really good, including Mark, who I submitted this to and everything. He's a very professional person, but that was the time he was, I think, going away or going on a vacation or something like that, or moving out or whatever. That was the time. But Mr. MacArthur was not even here, so I don't know if Mr. Lewis was there. I don't think so. I don't know. Okay. So okay, so this was. I'll go back to the letter that we received on November 5th of 2018. And they said that, yes, we have to submit the application form. And this is what it is. And it mentions it's a council decision to approve the tax exemption, and a staff report will need to be presented to council after receipt of the application. Staff thinks that your proposed project is eligible and supports the application with the proviso that the Zuri zoning application is approved by council. Now, once they mentioned that and everything, we had this was the time when we had the neighborhood meeting or something that we had at the time. And there's a lot of physical drawings, physical paper, physical things which were submitted at the time. Generally, the way we work is everything is digital, unless it is something which is required to be on the physical side. So that was when everything was made, the photocopies, whatever the physical things was submitted. My impression in June 2020, I guess, or so, June 2021, I talked to Mr. Smith and I said, I have this letter saying that I have to pay taxes, but I know that we are going to be exempted or whatever. So Mr. Smith says, well, we do not have any application. And that is when this whole thing starts. And we went back and forth, what is there and what is not there with them. And I had to go back onto what I have digitally on my computer. And I did find the application form that we signed and submitted. However, what was attached with it, I can't find. So I remember I see this application form, which was the part of it, and that is something that this is what I have. Anything else that gets submitted with it and everything, I do not have it. So Mr. Smith mentioned that, well, this requires that you have how much was the cost and everything. So how much was going to be the taxes, correct? So that's what Mr. Smith just right now mentioned that as well, that has never been submitted, so we do not know. So when I looked back and went through it, we did find an Excel sheet with Mr. Wayne submitting to us that how much the taxes is going to be based on the cost that we presented at the time. So we did present the cost and everything, and they did send us with an Excel sheet how much of the tax is going to be. So that happened in 2019 at the time that this discussion and everything. So what I'm trying to say here is that there is a discussion happen, and it's not just the discussion happen, it also the information was provided, like what is going to be the cost, and so they did provide on the Excel sheet how much is going to be there, and he did mention how much is going to be in the first year, how much is going to be the second year, third year, fourth year. He did mention in that Excel sheet. So I have that email with that Excel sheet mentioning from Mr. Wayne that this is what it is going to be. So although it is now based on the memory recollection and everything, but we do have evidences that this was, like for example, Mr. Smith mentioned that we do not have that any information was not given and how much the construction cost is going to be and how much those taxes is going to be. But what I'm saying is that, but I do have an email saying, even dividing it up, how much in the first year, second year, third year, and fourth year, and what will be the taxes and what is the construction cost. So I have that email with that Excel sheet mentioned. So, having said that, we can go back and forth in this whole thing. What I am trying to suggest here is this. The purpose of this whole thing is that we have applied, as Ms. White mentioned, asked for that, is there not a government organization involved in anything? So we have just, it is called a certain program, which we have a construction loan. We do not have any other thing, just like a construction loan to build that. We do not have any, it's not for, low income housing or whatever. But they did, it is through BC Housing Program. It is the BC Housing Program, but that is only for the construction loan for for-profit organizations to build that on market rent and everything. But they provided that on the basis of your letter, this letter that was Mr. Mark Broderick has provided, that city will be giving to us. So now when I go back and I say city is not giving to us, then they are going to say, okay, so we gave you on this condition, all of this, that you provide that letter to us that city will be giving to us. And for me, it is a matter of, we have submitted that application. We have the information that Mr. Smith can't find. Eventually, I found it on one of the email between me and Mr. Wayne, that how much of that construction cost and everything. So what I'm trying to say here is this. The purpose of this whole thing, of this exercise, I wanted to give a certain portion of cuts for the next 4 years to even 5 years to the people who are going to live there. And that is, I wanted to keep around, I don't know, how are we on record for this whole thing? I do not want to, okay, so I do not want to give the dollar value to it, that how much it is, but off the record, I can provide it to you guys, that I want to give 10% of the housing of ours to have really, really low, basically rent. That's the purpose. I know that how much the people need here, and it is only fair because we have been provided this letter that yes, we are supporting it. And I think because the city said that they are supporting it, I think now, regardless if it is after so many years or so and we couldn't find or whatever, city should stand behind and say that we were going to support and we should support. But I think city is no more, and they putting it on hinging it on a clause, and that clause is in the bylaw, that clause is number 12C. The work that has already been performed or for which a building permit application was submitted to the city prior to the application for an agreement. But this was submitted to them prior to an agreement, prior to the building permit was issued. So I think that this is a small, and I think the intent of this clause is where the building is that work has already been performed, but this is not really performed, it's still under construction. I haven't still put the rent up there, that what the rent is going to be. So I think putting that, hinging it on this clause seems like that they're going back on the letter that they provided that they will be supporting it. And that's the whole thing that they're trying to do, I think.
Are you ready for questions now?
Yes, I am.
Now, just a reminder to everybody, what we're discussing, that we're not discussing the project itself and asking questions about that. We're discussing whether or not to allow the applicant to submit a completed application on something that's already been started.
I'm sorry, can I say something, one thing? We maybe want to say that because I only find the form, the application that I submitted, whatever the part of the Schedule D was, I can't find, neither they do, that what was submitted with, because it was a hard copy. So it could be considered as resubmitted rather than submitted, which we don't know because we can't really come up with that.
Yeah, in my terminology, I'm thinking that it's...
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
I agree.
so it's a bit of a semantics there, but I just don't want us getting into the details of what the project is and so on, because that's dependent on this decision. So as long as we're discussing whether or not to allow the applicant to complete the submission process, that's what's on the table right now. So, Councillor Etchert.
So my question then is, when you had submitted this other cost, was that after you had discussed the 75 unit?
Yeah.
Or when you were discussing the other one?
Mm-hmm. After the 75 units. Yes, sir.
Okay, because originally it was the 95 unit where you had the 76 and the 19 low income.
Yeah,
So-
but then when we did the whole, okay, so first of all, when we did this neighborhood meeting and everything, that was with 75 unit plan. That was not with 94 unit plans. That was with 75 unit plan. And with that 75 unit plan, we submitted the cost that goes with it. And that's how I received this email with an Excel sheet breaking down how much per month.
And that was from Wayne, not our director at the time?
No, from the Wayne I got an Excel sheet with all this, how many years. I can pass it on that email to you
Okay.
guys, that is fine, with the division of how much each year it is going to be, with the calculation of how much it is going to be the taxes.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
My question about the government funding was going to be, would you have, in getting that government funding, would you have with the tax break, would you have gotten that funding if you would have had the tax break from the city?
So the tax breaks I did get from the city. I did provide that information for the loans, that this is what the information that the city is providing, that is how much it is going to be the taxes, and this is what we are going to get for the first 4 years.
That's not my question. My question is, would you have received that government funding getting the tax break from the city? And you kind of answered it actually in your...
Yes, so we have to have what the way BC Housing work in this whole thing, they want to push and enforce the developer to get to partner with all the other municipalities and other programs, so they all become the part of it to make sure that we get some really good projects here. So they did ask for it, and that was the reason we got this letter and asked Mr. Broderick at the time, and he provided that letter to me that this is what is going to be. And it went through back and forth, so we had to know how much that taxes were going to be, because that pro forma, that becomes a part of the pro forma that we send to our for the financing approval. And that's how we get it approval. So I provided all this information that we did receive from the city, and we have provided to them.
Okay, so was there any stipulations on whether it was going, because at the beginning of all this, it was clearly affordable housing, and then all of a sudden it changed in midstream.
Actually, no. Initially, when the 94 units were, we were talking about was that the density allowed for 75 units. Anything 19 units on top, if city would give the higher density, we would go give that 19 units and 19 units alone on a price at cost price, whatever the price is going to be. And what the developer's cost and everything, whatever the rent is going to be, will be based on those 75 units. That was the ordinary plan, and that's what initially presented. But what Mr. Smith asked for, okay, tell us how much that rent could be. So I projected based on the construction cost and everything that this is what the rent is going to be. And at that time, the city council says, well, it is too high. And so you didn't allow for those 19 units, saying you can go for the market 75 unit density. Now, having said that 75 unit density was basically hinged on the parking requirements. And the parking requirements which you didn't want to change, but you eventually changed after my project anyway. So eventually at the end, it would have been a different story if the parking requirements was already approved at the time. Anyways, I don't want to go what would have happened, what could have happened at the time. But what I'm saying here is this, that 75 units, even when we were talking about 94 units, the 75 units were going to be market price anyway.
But this government funding still hinged on whether or not you got this
letter. So for us, it is a matter of
got
this
this
letter
tax
provided.
exemption from the city.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't have had the tax exemption, would you have got the funding?
I don't know. That will be depending on the case and on them. I don't know. But the only thing I'm saying here is that we provided that information to them. It is our duty to support it.
Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I still want to keep us on track as far as what our decision is tonight. If we choose to have the applicant resubmit, then a lot of these type of questions are appropriate at that time to find out. So basically, if we can just stay true to the task at hand, whether we think that the applicant should be allowed to have his submission proceed. Question?
Yes. Well, my question was in helping me to make my decision on that matter.
Thank you. Mr. Luck?
Thank you, Councillor Christopherson. Irfan, when did you start the building again?
In 2020.
2020 or 2019?
No, 2020.
2020, all right. And did you
Sorry, this is 2020, 2020.
2020. And when did you when did you receive your first tax notice for that building?
We received it in 2020 when we received it.
Okay.
And so that is when so for me, it is a matter of, no, they're taking care of it. So then when they asked me that, okay, where is the tax, then at the time I talked to
So when
Mr.
did you
Smith.
make Mr. Smith aware that it didn't seem like you had the tax exemption?
When was it, Sean? June 20.
June of 2021. So you had a tax notice that you paid.
I paid because Mr. Smith
Why
mentioned.
didn't you bring it to our attention then?
I did.
You brought it to the attention in June 2020 when you got your notice and the taxes are going to be paid on July the 4th of 2020.
Yeah, so Mr. Smith.
You came in with your tax payment, and why is that?
So Mr. Smith mentioned to me and saying, even though if you take it to the city council right now, they cannot do it until the building is completed. They cannot do it when the building is not completed. That's what Mr. Smith mentioned at the time, and that's why we didn't bring it to the council at the time. But at the time, I did ask, let's go take it to the council, but somehow I don't know why it wasn't taken here.
Okay, that helps a bit. Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
I just wanted to be clear, all of that conversation was in June of 2021.
Yeah.
Not in 2020, it was in 2021.
Yeah. Okay. No.
So my understanding here, correct me if I'm wrong, is there's a whole year, June 20 to 21 is a year that nothing was said.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Then why didn't you bring it to our attention
I
in June
did.
of 2020?
I did.
I'm just hearing that we didn't hear it until 2021. 2021 is a much different year than 2020.
No, so June 2020.
I'm just trying to get clarity.
Okay. So June 2021, I got the letter of somewhere in the letter that you have to pay in May or June or so. They may have provided it in January 2021, but we said it should be
Well, it
taken
comes out,
care of.
tax notices come out in May.
Yeah, so May
Right.
when it comes. So when in June is when I'm saying that, okay, we have to do, what do we have to do now here? So, Mr.
Oh, fair enough on that, but I'm just saying 2020 is much different than 2021. You got your tax notice, you paid those taxes, and you didn't say.
No, I paid.
It sounds like you didn't say anything until June of 2021. I gotta get clarity, which is right. and
So
which is
I paid in June 2021. I never paid anything before.
No taxes were paid
No
until
were
June
paid
of
before.
2021?
No.
You never got a tax notice?
As soon as we
Well, you
bought,
would have got a tax notice because you own the land, so you got
Correct.
at least on the land.
correct. That is when we bought the land, at the time the taxes were paid at the time of the closing.
Right.
But after that, nothing was paid until June of 2021 when I came up and said,
But,
no, we
but
can't do it.
construction was underway in June of 2022.
Yeah,
So I'm still struggling with why it was, as soon as you got your notice then and noticed you had paid taxes, why you didn't come in June 31 of 2020 to make it
because, okay, so before June 2021, I brought Mr. Smith at the time, that this is what we have to pay. I have never paid. I have not paid because I thought it was nothing. It's not really relating to us. And I don't know why they are sending it to us. The city should have been taken care of. So at the time when I brought it to June 2021, they said, no, we have to pay because it's still under construction. Even if we take it to city council, it's under construction.
here nor there, paid
I'm
taxes?
going to get some clarification from you.
Yes, please, because I'm confused.
Thank you,
I'm
Worship.
sure I'm not the only one.
I actually want to acknowledge a point here that's really important in understanding when certain things are assessed. And so to Mr. Sonawala's credit on this is the assessment dates are in July of the previous year for the next tax year.
right.
And so if he's getting his 2020 tax notice is going to be based on what the state of the building was in 2019. And so it is wholly possible, and again, I have not explored this, and so please don't take this as factual, but that 2021 would have been the first time he's recognizing an increase in land value for construction costs on the property. That's a possible outcome. There are other points that I'll happily, I would love to elaborate on, but for that point there, he is correct that isn't unreasonable that the first time he may not have noticed this was if when the land value goes up. We do acknowledge that the bylaw itself does not kick in until the building is complete, and that's what I was referring to, so I wanted to make a slight clarification there. So a developer should never expect to receive a tax revitalization exemption until after occupancy. Even if they went through the full and proper process, you don't get it until the project is done. And so in that particular instance, there was no circumstance where the tax was ever not going to be payable, but that isn't answering the question of whether the application was made. So my apologies. I hope I didn't muddy the waters, but wanted to
I think you
provide
clarified
some
them a little bit more.
clarification.
Thank you.
And I do believe that many of these kind of questions are what will be coming up if we have an application coming forward to us. So our question tonight is basically, are we going to accept a resubmission or not? I'd like us just to stay on topic for that. Okay, many of these other questions will be up to staff to research carefully, and then the appropriate time for asking those questions is at that time. Is my understanding correct? Okay. Mr. Etchart.
So one question I have to help me not be on the fence about this, when they do their assessments in October, it's based on the status of the construction, and because they don't get the exemption until they get occupancy, would they still, when we do the revitalization, is it just based on the improvement? Or is it on the whole thing? Because the parcel taxes for the water sewer will still apply, but the revitalization would be on the improvement on the property. So when they get the occupancy and if they get their 4 years, would it just be the next 4 years at the schedule laid out and on the improvement, or would they still pay the municipal portion on the land value? So, because when they purchased the land, it was the original in the submission of the 382. So would they pay that still and then just have the revitalization on the improvement of the land, which might be 15 million or whatever it is by the time he's done building, or just, you know. I know it's technical,
It's a very good question, but I think probably it should wait until we know whether we're going to proceed. So are there any further?
I have one thing, if I just want to, for the clarity purpose of it, I just want to say, right now, the difference in our position between Mr. Smith and myself is basically the 12C part. So if you go to the 12C, saying work that has, so first of all, if you take it, the work C, the section C, 12C is how it is being interpreted. Otherwise, if you present it that way, that unless the construction, it doesn't mention throughout anyway that before the building permit submission, this has to be approved. It doesn't mention anything except this 12C part. So in other words, if the 12C part is not there, and especially the letter that was given to me, that does not even mention that it has to be submitted by this part or whatever, but it's a main hinge is the 12C between our position. And the 12C is work, except work that has already been performed. Question is it substantially performed legally speaking? Legally speaking, substantially performed is presented in two different ways. Number one is 3-to-1 ratio. And the second one is that if it is used for the intent of it, if it is being used for the intent of its use, Mr. Luck will be able to tell better. So that is a lien act, correct? So as far as the lien act goes, if the only difference between me and the staff is this 12C part, which says work that has already been performed or for which a building permit application was submitted to the city prior to the application for an agreement. What I'm saying is that the work has not been performed. It's not being used for the intent of its use. So it's basically, it's the 12C part where it's an interpretation of 12C, and I'm saying we have evidences that were submitted. So now the question in this whole thing is that we can say, so well, we do not have evidences, or we do have evidences, but everything that hinged upon is the 12C. Tell me, Mr. Smith, if I'm wrong.
Mr. Smith.
In my opinion, you're wrong. And there's 3 points that I would like to speak to, Council, in pseudo rebuttal to this. One is there's been much assertion on the fact that we issued a letter saying what staff would support. That is not giving an exemption. We don't have the power to give an exemption. Two, I have to reiterate that letter expressly stated the requirements of what constitutes an application, and I think that you can't read 12C, which says for which an application for an agreement is submitted, go up to section 11 and it tells you what constitutes an application, and that application has to have a whole schwack load of things. There might have been some dollar value back and forth exchange. What I can promise you is there was never any agreement. That like 100%, there was never an agreement in executable form. And I know very well because I was in the Director of Corporate Services seat at the time, and we had gone back and forth working through a potential housing agreement and weren't able to come to an agreement on that. And we at no point ever had discussions on any tax revitalization agreement.
Absolutely agree. There is no agreement signed. However, it does not necessarily mean that the shebang, which is Schedule D, was not submitted. The only thing is that we can't find it, except, for example, one part that Mr. Smith mentioned, that especially what the construction cost is and what the tax amount will be, we've never decided. And I'm saying, well, I do have that in my email talking to Mr. Wayne about it.
So we're going back and forth a bit here, more than what I think we need to be doing, Mr. Smith.
For me, I would like this to be a question of, was an application submitted? Because even if staff were to concede that Schedule D was submitted on this point, which again, we don't have any record of, but stuff happens. Like, is that possible? We fully acknowledge that's a possibility. Application, section 11, I'm going to read it out here because I think that, and if you could pull it up, Greg, for folks to follow along. So, if an owner of a parcel wishes council to consider entering into an agreement, and that being a tax revitalization agreement, of which is the substance of what we're talking about here, the owner must apply to the Director of Engineering and Development or his or her designate using the form attached to this bylaw as Schedule D and must submit the following with the application: a certificate that all taxes assessed and rates, charges, and fees imposed on the parcel have been paid, a copy of the current property assessment notice for the parcel as issued by BC Assessment, a description of the eligible project, including details regarding the extent and value of the project, which will be confirmed by the building permit process, and a proposed agreement in executable form. If staff is going to have any hope of ever doing our job for you, we have to go through what the process is in the bylaw. And it states what an application is. It is all of those elements in 11A through D. The Schedule D alone, in staff's view, does not constitute an application. It can't constitute an application. How can we have a tax revitalization agreement if there's no discussion of an agreement? I do acknowledge that had we received that Schedule D and had a discussion, it could have led to a talk of an agreement. I fully acknowledge that. That being said, the whole point of a tax revitalization agreement for council is to induce development that you may not otherwise be able to induce but for that agreement. And in this instance, it appeared to staff that this was going forward without any agreement. And again, I stand on the fact that when we sent that letter saying we're in support of this, this was a different project at the time. It really was. And it did change in 2019. And maybe we would have been supportive of it then, or maybe we wouldn't have been. But it isn't, when that project changed, it is wholly possible that our opinion may have changed, but there was never any further discussion on it for us to even consider that. We didn't know, we didn't talk about it, and I don't have record of it, but perhaps there was a conversation with Wayne, but I have to acknowledge that, again, if there is a conversation with finance on, hey, how much would a tax revitalization exemption be? Here would be the numbers. That still doesn't constitute an agreement itself, and it has to be the owner's responsibility to make sure they're meeting the terms of that bylaw. If it's important to them, if they need it for their development, it's a very tough proposition for us to go back years after the fact and say, oh, P.S., there's a whole bunch of stuff that you needed to do, and the project's already off and running.
So if I may rephrase slightly, if council's decision is to allow for a resubmission, then we would go through this process properly. If council's decision is that it's not useful to revisit this, then we need to make that decision tonight. And that's our only decision. We can't make the decision of whether this is going to be accepted or not. So I think we've probably had a lot of discussion, and the point is very clear. Are we going to allow a resubmission of a process and that would have to be grandfathered in? Or are we going to not allow that and go ahead? I will allow you one last comment, Irfan, and then we're going to have to proceed.
Thank you, Your Lordship. Just the reason I'm mentioning, because I know Mr. Smith is mentioning about this application, that this is the application, complete application that needs to be submitted. Okay, fine. Which all A, B, C can be identified that I've been submitting it or whatever, or we couldn't find it. It was the question number is the proposed agreement executable form. And signing of an agreement or writing of an agreement depends on both the parties, not just one. So I don't think I should be, my leg should be cut because of that, because agreement has to be written by both parties. Number one. Most important part, before even this application form. So application form can be submitted anytime before the substantial performance or substantial completion of the building. So what I'm saying is all this process can be submitted now. It all hinged on, back again to 12C. This 11 number is lesser important because it's not time constraint. I can submit it now even, and we can do that because it's not substantially performed. The main item is 12C. I go back to that, and that's work that has already been performed, which is already been performed. I'm saying it is because it is not being performed, it is still this process is open for me. That's what I'm saying. This all depend on the 12C, where substantially performance, the performance or the substantial performance in the Lean Act is very clear what is substantially performed.
Excuse me, all documents have to be in before council can even make a decision. Mr. Smith.
I loathe bringing up statutory interpretation, but there's a really important or in that clause, for which a building permit application was submitted, and that application was submitted again in, I think that the application went in late 2019 and it was approved in 2020. And so we've got a concrete date for the second portion of that clause, and I agree, you could debate till kingdom come what constitutes for which work has already been performed. Is it starting? Is it substantial completion? I don't know. I can tell you if we redraft it, we'll probably have a concrete date provision. But I think that where we do have a concrete date for the second provision here, was that application in prior to the building permit being submitted at the end of 2019? That's, again, completely up to council's interpretation, and I don't have any further comment on that.
I don't know who's first. Travis, we'll go to you.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to confirm that we still have the council debate portion to come. Is that correct? Okay.
And it's a toss-up.
I think Adam was next.
Mr. Councilor Richard.
I didn't even.
I think it comes down to the fact that when you make an application, if we don't receive everything at the same time, the debate is, well, we didn't receive everything at the same time, so we don't have all the information. But at the same time, I also understand that in 2020, then we had COVID and everything was a bit of a challenge too. So if it does get resubmitted, we're going to be able to debate it then. And my first thought would be, well, if we didn't have everything, it's simple. But at the same time, it's also been a rough few years, and I'm not here to say, well, you didn't submit something because you have emails and Sean has different emails as well. But at the same time, we all have to agree with something as well. So even if I think, well, maybe we should reconsider, it doesn't mean it would be approved because we have to have consensus. And we all hope to see that housing open, available to residents. So it's not an easy thing for us, because if we change the rules for you, are we going to have others come up? But I see that you did submit, and I can appreciate your argument. So thank you for your information.
That's it? No more questions? No more comments? Mr. Smith? No. Thank you, friend. It's been really interesting. So council has a decision to make, and it's, having considered the relevant facts, testimony, and law, determine whether or not to accept the revitalization tax exemption application for 4010 Walter Street. And accepting the application does not answer the question It's simply one step, so. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Okay, Fair and Luck. Any more comments, questions? Okay. Okay, the question is whether to accept the revitalization tax exemption application or not. So, all in favor of doing so? Oops, I didn't see your light flashing.
Thank you. I just want to make a statement saying that bylaws regarding receiving applications in full are part of council's place in maintaining clear and transparent governance. Without clear evidence that the application was submitted in full, the responsibility of council is to reject the application.
Anybody else? Malvina?
So can I ask a question to staff? Or is this, so I can't ask them any more questions?
I think we're finished there.
Okay, then, in that case, then I have to agree with, Councillor Etchart, and, I would like to see a resubmission of the, so we could clearly go through everything and have all the questions answered. Thanks.
Councillor Luck.
These are always tricky, and I think Councillor Fair has pointed out some, stumbling blocks of this. We set precedent, who's going to roll in next if we approve this with their application. Oh, I had mine in. We recently had one on one of the projects here. No, we paid our fees, but nobody could find a receipt. There was no receipts, but everybody's adamant the fees have been paid. And it's the same kind of situation here. Everybody's adamant, or some people are adamant that it did get submitted, others are adamant that it didn't get submitted. And these are always tricky situations when we go up against the public. As it's been stated, there's no guaranteed, even if he resubmits his application correctly, that it's going to be passed anyway. It's up to council to make those decisions. And recently, council has pulled that bylaw for reasons, varied reasons. So in light of what's happened tonight, I think, I want to use the word fairness, but I don't think that's the word either. But I think that I'm going to support the resubmitting of the policy, the application tonight, and I think we can have a very robust discussion when it comes forward at that time. Thank you.
Councillor Etchart.
He says that
Final
with
word.
careful approach. I do see Councillor Fair's point about, keeping the fairness and peace, everything in there. But at the same time, because we've had such an extraordinary time with restrictions and COVID and everything, I think that if we give the resubmission, at least then we can have robust discussion about it. We need the housing. Everything is increased. Everything has changed. Everything, building housing, everything is difficult. So, I think having the resubmission. Normally I probably would say no. I am concerned with what could come up afterwards, but at the same time, we also want to be fair, and we appreciate that you come to council and discuss with us and discuss maybe what we don't see. And I've seen the units, and I can appreciate that it's nice to see some new apartments in Merritt available for people as well. So that's why my first thought would be, no, we can't do that. But at the same time, we also want to be fair as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to call the question. Yes? Yes?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to note that when you went through the moving and seconding process, you did read the recommendation as it's in the staff report that Council, having considered the relevant facts, testimony and law, determine whether or not to accept the RTE application for 4010 Walter Street. And it sounds from the debate as though what you plan on having a vote on is that Council, having considered the relevant facts, testimony and law, determine to accept the revitalization tax exemption application for 4010 Walter Street. So people voting yes would be saying accept the application and allow it to be submitted, and people voting no would be saying do not accept the application resubmission at this time. And I just wanted to confirm that with the 5 of you before you took a vote.
I'll read it out that way. Thank you. Thanks. So the recommendation is that Council, having considered the relevant facts, testimony and law, determines to accept the revitalization tax exemption application for 4010 Walter Street. Moved and second by White, moved by Luck. Any more debate? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And then we will do this when it comes back complete.
This one was fun.
Yes. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time.
And now we will go on to Statement of Financial Information for 2021, 9.2, to be introduced by Mr. Thompson.
So this is an annual requirement for all municipalities to prepare a statement of financial information for public release. And the city's SOFI for 2021 is attached and must be approved by council, signed and submitted to the province by June 29th, 2022. The SOFI contains information about remuneration and expenses paid to and on behalf of council and staff. And amounts are listed individually for council, plus any employees that were paid over $75,000 in 2021. Also included is a listing of all suppliers paid an aggregate total of over $25,000 in 2021. So the 2021 SOFI for the City of Merritt must be approved at an open meeting and filed with the province prior to June 29, 2022 as a requirement of the Financial Information Act, and failure to comply with the requirements of the Act could result in penalties. And so the recommendation is that Council approves the City of Merritt Statement of Financial Information for the year ended December 31st, 2021 as presented, and authorizes the Mayor and the Acting Director of Finance and IT to sign the statement on behalf of the City.
White and Luck. Any comments or questions for staff? No. Well, if there aren't any, then I guess we're ready to vote on it. So the recommendation that Council approves the City of Merritt Statement of Financial Information for the year ended December 31st, 2021 as presented, and authorizes the Mayor and the Acting Director of Finances and IT to sign the statement on behalf of the City of Merritt. And all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 9.3, 2022 Grant and Aid, additional request from the Nicola Valley Kennel Club, and who is presenting this one?
That's me again. So we received this application a month ago from the Nicola Valley Kennel Club, and they would like to $5,000 out of their total budget of $35,000, so roughly 14%. So they can move the show from, it used to be in the Voigt Park, and they're going to move it up to the rodeo grounds. And they want to extend it, typically it's a 2-day event, and they want to extend it to a 4-day event. But moving it up to the rodeo grounds will also allow them to have some tents and trailers up there as well to help increase their revenues. Plus they want to put on some shows throughout the year, information sessions for dogs, and it's a show that's well received in the dog family out there. So you have the choice to accept, change the amount out of your council contingency to provide funding for this request and other requests coming up during the year.
Any questions for staff? No? Thank you, Melvin. Councillor White?
What exactly is the, like, what do they need the $5,000 for? Like,
There's a total budget there, $35,000. That show entry fees for the Canadian Kennel Club is $11,000. Judges is $10,000. Ring officials is $1,000. Travel and accommodation for them is $6,000. Prizes is $1,000. The venue is $1,500. And Nicola Valley Rodeo Association share of camping fees is $2,500. And insurance will be $2,000 for a total of $35,000.
thank you.
So reading it over, I noticed that if you subtract the amount of the grant, they're $5,000 short. So that's the reason that they're applying for the grant, and it's basically to pay for the new location, I think. Any other questions, comments? I'll ask the question then. The recommendation is that council approve the grant and aid request for the Nicola Valley Kennel Club for $5,000 for financial aid in May 2022 from the council contingency. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Mover and Luck and no, Fair and Luck. Any questions, comments? I'll ask the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Oh. Any notices of motion? Any reports from council? Any information items? Any comments on them? I did on the Bailey House report, because I'm told by several people that Bailey House during the flood took in a lot of donations of furniture and so on, and they made all of those donations absolutely free to people who had been affected by the flood. So they usually take a commission on things and resell them and so on, but for anything that came in that a flood victim said they had a use for, Bailey House gave it to them for no charge. So I'd like to thank them for doing a really much needed community service at that time. So thank you, Bailey House. Any other? No? This meeting? Oh, Councillor Fair.
It's probably not necessary at this point. You've said it all, Your Worship. Acting Worship, I guess. But
I wasn't acting.
Yeah, it just brings home the point that many organizations in Merritt stepped up and helped, and we don't always hear about all the details of it, but I know there are lots of them out there, so they all deserve a lot of thanks, and every Merrittonian does that stepped up and helped, because there was a lot of it going on, and there still is.
Yeah, there's still a lot needed to be done. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. And sometimes when the tough times come to a place, the good comes out as well, and often we hear about the negative things, but I think the positives far outweigh that. So thank you for reminding us. And this meeting is terminated.